All right, well, let's get started. So first off, of course, a big thank you for all of you for being here, for being part of this Aphasia Access community, and for getting together to have a conversation about conversation. So a couple things before we get to the panelists. Just a quick reminder that the Aphasia Access is hosting the International Aphasia Rehabilitation Conference. So IARC 2022 is happening in Philly in June 22nd through the 24th. So the call for papers is out. We hope that you'll take some time to submit and hope to see you there. The info is at our website, aphasiaaccess.org. So great things happening there. Look forward to being together as a community. You may have received an email the other day, just a brief announcement that Aphasia Access is very privileged and fortunate to receive the Jerry Cormier Communicative Access Award, and that's presented by the Aphasia Institute in Toronto, recognizing organizations, individuals who have reduced barriers to life participation for people with aphasia. So we're very appreciative of that award, and many thanks to all who have made that happen, including this great community on the Zoom call today. So last thing, this is a big attended event. We have members and we have non-members. If you're not a member and thinking about joining, we'd sure love it if you would. If you're a member, we're sure glad you're here and glad that you make this Aphasia Access community what it is. We're going to put a link in the chat in just a bit if people are interested in membership, so that you can join in and take advantage of these kinds of opportunities. So with that being said, let's have a conversation about conversation. We're absolutely thrilled to have these four wise, thoughtful, skilled clinicians that you see from across time zones, from across the ocean, talking all things conversation and aphasia therapy. Each of our speakers will be discussing different aspects of conversation and aphasia therapy. And at the end, we'll have a couple minutes for discussion. So given the number of attendees as people continue to come in, and we want to welcome you all for being here, we'll just hold all the questions till the end and we'll do them via the chat. You can put them in the chat and we'll moderate those questions. So with that being said, we want to get right to it. So let's just start by meeting the panelists. So Suzanne, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Tom. Hi, I'm Suzanne Beeke, and I'm talking to you from University College London in the UK. And I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm here because I'm interested in conversation, because it's an amazing human skill. And I want to be able to help people with aphasia to have better conversations. So over to you, Marion.
Hi, I'm Marion Leaman. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, and I'm a clinician. And I'd like to thank Aphasia Access for inviting me here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suma Devanga. I'm an assistant professor at the Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I've been working on aphasia for the last couple of years, mainly focusing on treatments for aphasia that help bridge the clinical functional gap in individuals with aphasia. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Aphasia Access.
And I'm Jody Morgan, and I'm Brooks Rehab Aphasia Center Manager, and I'm also a clinical assistant professor at Jacksonville University, and I'm thrilled to be with this dynamic panel to have a conversation about conversation. So I think it's going to be a great hour. I'm excited. Thank you.
Wonderful. And like Jody said, we have only an hour, and we could probably spend 4 or 5 hours and still wouldn't get beyond the surface. But the panelists have each decided to put together a really kind of dense 10 or 12 minute conversation about conversation. So Suzanne will start us off talking a bit about the importance of conversation, talking about better conversations approach, and talking about some practical tips on delivering better conversations approach to communication partner training. So Suzanne, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll just share my slides with you. Okay, I now can't see you very well, so just tell me if anything's going wrong here, but if I don't hear from you, I'll assume all is well. Okay, so I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you about some practical applications of our Better Conversations approach that we've developed here at University College London. And I just want to name check a couple of my colleagues in this, because I have used some of their fantastic clinical resources. That's Claire Farrington-Douglas and Anna Volkmer, who work at and who run a communication partner training clinic at the hospital just around the corner from UCL, Queen Square in London. Okay, so first of all, I just thought I'd remind us all why we're here. So why conversation is important. And I think that we're all really clear that conversation is the primary way that we communicate our opinions, our feelings, and shape our lives. And this is something that most of us take for granted, that we do every waking moment of our lives. And it's something that communication disorders affect significantly. And I just like to remind us all that when we're talking about conversation, it's really important we remember that both people in a conversation share the challenges of a communication disorder. It's a shared problem for conversation. And we know that having better conversations is a rehabilitation priority for people with aphasia. So Sarah Wallace in Australia did some fantastic work where she interviewed a whole host of people with aphasia across the world, in fact, with colleagues working with her. And one of the things that they wanted to be able to do was have more complex and in-depth conversations, so conversations that weren't just about everyday needs. And that's something that's really important for us to know as speech language pathologists. And since currently our therapy doesn't reliably generalize to what people do in their everyday conversations, that's why I think a direct focus on helping people with their conversation skills is really, really important. Okay, so what is the Better Conversations approach? So at UCL, we have what we call the Better Conversations Lab, which I'm thrilled to say is now a group of about 15 of us, from master students through PhD students to seasoned academics, who are all working towards this goal of helping with people with communication difficulties have better conversations. So we work across lots of different disorders and across developmental and acquired conditions. But obviously, I'm going to talk to you about better conversations with aphasia. So this is our approach, where we're really trying to promote conversations that flow and are enjoyable for people with aphasia and for their family members. So I'm going to talk tonight about a focus on family dyads in conversation. And this intervention is based on our understanding of how conversation works. So the mechanics of conversation, which we know lots about from conversation analytic work that began in the US in the 1960s and is now going on in various centres across the world, and includes an applied branch of conversation analysis, which is focused on communication disorders. So Better Conversations is basically a type of communication partner training. So I'm using that as an umbrella term now, CPT. And we know that CPT works. I saw Nina earlier, so I know she's with us. So just a plug for Nina and colleagues, really important systematic review of communication partner training, 2010, updated in 2016. So we should all be doing communication partner training because it helps people with aphasia to have better conversations, to participate in conversations more. So the Better Conversations principles, very briefly, we have a focus on what we call the dyad. So that's both the person with aphasia and their chosen conversation partner, family member, friend is the focus of what I'm talking about tonight. And we focus our intervention on both of those people. We focus on skills, so identifying with them what their skills are, and also what the difficulties are for conversation. So very much a skills-based approach, not just about the difficulties. And we have a focus on strategies, and we talk about barriers, and facilitators to conversation. So we're aiming in our intervention to maximize the use of facilitators, by which we mean positive strategies that help the conversation flow. And we're trying to help people to minimize the impact of barriers to conversation. I'll say a little bit more about barriers and facilitators in a minute. We are aiming to give people choice and ownership in this intervention. So clients identify their own conversation barriers. I'll tell you how we do that in a minute. And they choose their own preferred strategies, so facilitators, to practice. And practice, practice, practice. We feel this is really key. So it's not enough for someone to observe a strategy being modeled. Both people in the dyad need to practice their conversation strategies. That's at the heart of better conversations. And the SLP is the person who coaches them in doing that. Okay, so I said I was going to say a bit more about facilitators and barriers. What you can see on the left of your screen here is a screenshot from our online resource, Better Conversations with Aphasia, which is free and which you're all welcome to register for and have a look at after this session. And I'll make sure that Tom has the URL for that, but it's on my final slide as well. So when we talk about facilitators and barriers, we're focused on things that either impede or help the flow of conversation. So we're not talking about perfection in conversation. The outcome really is about participation. And what we do as the SLT is observe what facilitators might already naturally be happening in people's conversations, and also what barriers we can see. And we do that by asking people to video record snippets of their conversation at home during everyday activities that they would be engaged in. And we use those videos also to help our dyad to identify their own barriers and facilitators in conversation. And interestingly, these aren't always the ones that we as SLTs identify as barriers. So self-identification by the clients, we find increases their motivation to change their conversation behaviours. And actually, we know that changing conversation behaviours is a complex process. It's a complex mechanism. It's like any of us trying to learn a new skill. It takes time and it takes practice. So what do we actually do? Well, and these few slides coming up are from Claire Farrington Douglas and Anna Volkmer's work at the National Hospital. We start off by explaining what communication partner training is to the client, and then we discuss a potential communication partner that they might want to work with and to invite to do CPT with them. And then we explain the intervention to the client and their chosen communication partner together, and we explore the use of video with them. So I don't have too much time to get into that tonight, but we do recognise that the use of video recording is something that needs to be addressed sensitively and carefully, and that some people have had bad previous experiences of that. But we've found that on the whole, people have appreciated the learning opportunity that video provides. And for people with aphasia thinking about their own conversations, it provides a very concrete way of viewing what's happening and talking about it, which I think is very facilitative. So in terms of making those videos as SLTs, we're really after some snippets of pretty natural conversation. Okay, people are videoing themselves. They can't forget that. But in this day and age, people are so used to taking videos on their phones, their iPads, videoing family events all the time. So I think more and more that people are finding videoing themselves is not something that they particularly find intrusive. So we're after natural conversation. So things we consider when we're asking people to make a video is the space and the setting that they want to make it in. What's the most natural for them? And we do talk to them about topics. So some people are quite happy with the idea that they'll just record a chat that they would usually have, so maybe over dinner or catching up after a day of doing different things from each other. Other people need a bit more support with topics that they might talk about. We ask them to video roughly about 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be consecutive 10 minutes, but we know that if we're looking as an outcome measure at these videos, we need at least 5 minutes of good conversation in order to look to see if people are using their strategies before and after. We want both people in view, and ideally we want them at home. We want them in their home environment so that we can see what conversations are really like for them. And recently, because of the pandemic, we've been recording over Zoom, which actually has worked quite well for both the dyad and the therapist, although it may be a bit less natural because of the way that you have to sit in order to be in front of the screen. So what do we do with those videos? But Tom, I'm aware that there are other things in the chat. I can't tell if you've messaged me. You have. Okay, I'm finishing up. We reflect on those videos with people. We use them to help them to set goals. So which of those strategies they want to work on. And then we practice those strategies. We help them to practice. Okay. So I'm going to leave that as my last slide. I'm just going to point out some bits that we do. So with those video clips, we found that watching very small parts multiple times is often the way to go. And we ask questions like, what do you think's happening here? How did you feel about this clip? Why did you do that in this clip? So that, in a nutshell, is the better conversations approach. And I'm very happy to answer any further questions at the end. And then you can have a look at our free online resource if you'd like to. Thanks, Tom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. And we know it's a impossible task to summarize all your work in 11 minutes or less, but I certainly appreciate it. Hopefully these are nuggets that spur further conversations as well as exploration of your wonderful resources. So let's keep moving on as we talk, and we'll move over to Marion, who's been doing a fair amount of work about typical everyday conversations between people without aphasia and how we can learn more about conversational features therapeutically that we can embed into conversations with individuals with aphasia. So Marion, if we can turn it over to you and hear a bit more about your work and thoughts on conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom. Can everyone see the screen? Is it sharing okay? Okay, so I call this talk SLPs as engineers of communication opportunities, choosing our conversational terms with therapeutic intention. So I'm really interested in understanding what it is that makes people share opinions, stories, and comments when they aren't explicitly asked to do so, because this kind of communication is complex, voluntary, and personally relevant. And of course, these are key components that drive neuroplasticity, motivation, and flow, all of which contribute to positive rehabilitation outcomes. And I've been thinking that if we can understand the answer to this question, we potentially have some very powerful intervention tools. So here are a couple of features from everyday conversation that are fairly explicit in how they invite a response. So for instance, we often use questions to elicit language because they require responses. When we ask a yes/no question, we get a yes/no response. When we ask a closed-ended question, we usually get a short response. If we ask a specific open-ended question, we receive the relevant response, as you can see here. Likewise, when we request specific information, the other person will provide that information.
Hey, Marion.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think I'm seeing on my screen, I think I'm seeing your presenter view.
Oh my gosh.
So if you
Really?
switch it around, it works.
Let's see. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was just my screen, but we saw the
probably wasn't. Let's see. Give me a minute.
Sure.
I don't have a minute.
No, it's no problem.
Okay, how's that?
That looks wonderful. We won't even dock you time on that either.
Oh
Marion.
my gosh. Okay.
Thank you.
All
it looks
right.
great.
Good. Okay, so I want us to consider, however, that these features can restrict the responses in terms of content, form, use, and complexity, and also make the comment that in these kinds of interactions, control over the conversation tends to be maintained by the SLP. So why does this matter? If these features predominate in our therapy sessions, we potentially limit the variety of linguistic opportunities for the person with aphasia, limit the opportunity to initiate new topics and direct the conversation, and these together can potentially reduce agency. In addition, the conversation may begin to feel like an interview, although our intention in therapy is usually to facilitate social conversations. So what can we do about this? One suggestion is to expand our repertoire to more regularly include intentional use of several less restrictive and less directive features of everyday conversation. These features also invite responses, but do so more implicitly, which may contribute to their underutilization or lack of recognition as active, valuable therapeutic tools. So for instance, the linguistics literature tells us that storytelling often happens in rounds, so that if the SLP tells a story, the person with aphasia may respond by telling a story. I like to say stories beget stories. Other responses may be questions or reactions to the story. We can also use comments therapeutically. Comments can be mini stories, such as, all I did over the weekend was go to the movies, or reactions like, I've been wanting to see that movie. Key is that we need to resist following our comments up with questions. In order to create flexible opportunities for the person with aphasia to direct the conversation, we need to stop our own talking. Silence is another very valuable tool. None of us like silence during conversation. That awkward silence thing is something people talk about, right? But if we use this knowledge strategically, we can use silence to provide opportunities for communication to the person with aphasia. If we allow silence to happen by deferring our turns, it's likely the other person will fill in the blank. So when we make intentional therapeutic use of these additional features, we potentially open up opportunities for the person with aphasia to choose what and how to contribute, to shift the conversation and initiate new topics, to tell stories, make requests, ask questions, provide opinions, and all kinds of other features that we see in social interactions. So when we balance these choices that we have to make, we create potentially a communicative environment that's more similar to a social conversation, and we share the control of the interaction, which is associated with an improved rich communicative environment. So I have another number of examples of this from my data, and now I have to move my picture of everyone so I can see my examples. Okay, so these all come from the same person, and I've given an example of these different types of SLP turns and then the results. So this person has moderate conduction aphasia, and when I asked him a question, what kind of work were you doing before your stroke? He responded, a hedge fund. Or another question, I said to him, you worked for a few years or got your MBA right away? And his response was, I worked. When I made a request for information, tell me about any activities you do or clubs you belong to. Doesn't that sound like an interview? He responded, well, I do speech therapy on Tuesday, Wednesday. However, in the same person, when the SLP shared a story, I had a teacher who did a sabbatical from school and she went to Senegal. Mike responded, oh, really? There? Wow, but then when you talk, they speak English there? What kind of people were there talking? How does she know? Or in another example, when I shared this story about my son went to camp last summer for 3 weeks for trombone up in Maine, Mike answered, wow, no way, overlapping me in a very typical way of social interactions. And then he spontaneously offered his own story. That's where Nico went last year for camp, because there's so much things for the kids. Nico went last year at 7 weeks. When I made a comment, I think I told you I studied economics undergraduate. That's a mini story. He said, and what was that school you went to? And then here's an example where the SLP uses silence. They had been discussing which of his family members would be going on a trip to Brazil. At the end of that topic, the SLP deferred her turn and waited a couple of seconds. And Mike said, the only thing that I really think about when we go there is about the food. How about the kind of foods it's supposed to be? So that'll be really cool. And he has the opportunity to initiate a new topic of interest. Now, just in case you may be thinking that this is typical only in working with people with fluent aphasia, I have 3 examples from 3 different people with moderate non-fluent aphasia. So here is a woman when the SLP shared this story. My mom is one of 5, and they all went to Catholic school. And my uncles always laugh because my mom and aunts always have a wonderful idea of nuns. And my uncles are always like, I don't know who you're talking about. They were always so much meaner to the boys than the girls. And Adelaide responds, I don't know. And there's an extended repair sequence during which she finally retrieves the name Sister Angela, and she says, Sister Angela. And the SLP says, you got hit? Yes. And so here's an example of a multimodal story that was told by this woman in response to the SLP story. Here's an example where we see the SLP make a comment. We also see the SLP use yes/no questions, and you can see the different kinds of responses. They're talking about traveling by small airplanes, and the SLP says, I don't like those kinds of planes. Bart responds, back and forth, quick. And the SLP says, do you like those kinds of planes? Yup. You do? Yup. And she says, they're 2 once a week, Thursday, work, go plane. Okay, and here's another example for someone with non-fluent aphasia. And the SLP says, where are you from originally? And Marita says, Boston. Yeah, and this goes on for 22 seconds, during which the SLP very skillfully and intentionally chooses to defer her turn and allow silence. And the Marita finally says, I traveled a lot, and initiates this new topic of conversation regarding travel. So these are really powerful tools that we have. We all have this implicit knowledge of conversational features and how this works. So as the SLP, when you're thinking about how you might structure your turn in your therapy or your group conversational session, whichever one of these ways of communicating that you may select to contribute to the conversation will have impact on the kind of turn that the person with aphasia is likely to make. It will usually be aligned. Now, I want to mention this is not a one-to-one correspondence. So it's not automatic that I tell a story, someone else tells a story. It opens the opportunity, and it's okay that it's not a one-to-one correspondence. And then I also want to point out that the person with aphasia's turn, of course, is going to come back and influence the SLP's turn. And then the SLP's turn is going to influence the next turn. And this, of course, goes around in interaction in a circle, around and around. So I love to think about this from this really seminal work of John Heritage, who said every action is shaped by what came before, shapes what comes next. And he used this term that our interactions are context shaped and context renewing. And so that helps me remember this impact that I potentially can have as a clinician in my sessions. When we choose these conversational features, I want to point out that this is skilled, research-based, easy, free, flexible, tailored to the individual and the situation, takes no time, and promotes a rich communicative environment. So the very last thing I want to mention is a study that I've just recently completed with colleague Dr. Brent Archer, where we looked at the potential value of silence. And in this study, we looked at 20 conversations from people with aphasia in which the SLP or the partner deferred their turn and allowed silence to happen. And when we looked at form, we saw that the individuals on average produced almost four new unique words contributing to the conversation. From a content perspective, 40% of the time, the people were able to contribute biographical information, contributed general semantic information, and utterances about themselves and their opinions. And then when we looked at the use, they 40% of the time introduced new information into the conversation, introduced new topics, and the rest of the time they contributed to the ongoing conversation. So this was really positive to us to recognize the potential value of using this as a clinical tool in our interventions. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marion. That is just fantastic. And it's such a great segue. You talked about the rich communicative environments and how those can be fostered by clinical skills as well as silence. And that leads us really nicely into Suma's work, talking about collaborative referencing interventions and how that can support rich communicative environments for people with aphasia. So we will turn the mic over to you, Suma. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So collaborative referencing intervention is one of the treatment methods that we have developed as a way to offer rich communicative environments for our clients with aphasia in order to promote successful learning in them. So before I go into that, I want to provide a brief background on rich communicative environments. So as you all may know, it is now well accepted that our everyday experiences shape the way we learn new information, and that contributes to the neuroplastic changes that happen in our brains. That includes changes in the brain structure and functions as well. So neuroscience research highlights the importance of environmental complexity on neuroplasticity and the resulting behavioral changes. And studies have shown that animals that are housed in environmentally complex conditions, such as living in groups, in large groups with toys that they can manipulate with, those environments are more stimulating for the brains as opposed to restricted environments. So applying this concept to human communication, the notion of rich communicative environments has been proposed. And basically, communicative environments are the physical, social, and temporal dimensions of our everyday communicative interactions. So clinically, instead of including environments that are rigid with minimum flexibility and with limited choices for participation, we need to be thinking about enriching our clinical environments. And so the richness of these environments can be enhanced by adding more complex stimuli, designing complex activities, providing opportunities for voluntary participation of our clients, and designing personally meaningful activities that are more optimized for the specific needs of individuals. So one treatment method that we've developed that employs these principles of rich communicative environments is the collaborative referencing intervention. And originally, CRI was used as barrier task experiments in neurotypical adults in psychology. And they were then adapted to be used for participants with cognitive communication disorders. And studies showed that individuals with aphasia and amnesia demonstrated successful learning within barrier tasks. And so that led to its adaptation as a clinical intervention. So the intervention itself has been designed as a conversational game between the client with aphasia and a partner. As you can see in this picture, the client and the partner sit across from each other with a low barrier that is separating them. And they each have numbered boards in front of them. And each player will assume the role of a director and a matcher alternatively. The director gets 12 personalized photos that are strategically selected based on the client's interests and experiences. And so then the director arranges those pictures on his board randomly. And then the matcher also gets a replica of the same 12 photos. And so the director has to describe each of the photo and its location to the partner who has to match those pictures. Accuracy of photo placements will be checked after each trial, and the pair will lose points if they misplace any of these photos. And so when all 12 photos are placed, have been matched to their locations, one trial is said to be complete. And so in the following trial, the roles will be alternated and the game resumes again. And such, each session will have 6 such trials of referencing. And during each trial, the players are asked to collaborate and come up with names for each photo and repeat the names for extra points. And that is key. We want our players to meaningfully repeat the labels multiple times while they have conversations about those photos. And the only rule of this game is to not look over the barrier. And anything else goes. People can use gestures, facial expressions, or any other forms of augmentative and alternative communication. And the players are basically encouraged to narrate stories about those photos or share jokes and to just have fun throughout the game. So I want to play this video that I have to demonstrate how this game works and also to demonstrate the richness and complexities of this activity itself. So here you see Mr. Bear, which is the pseudonym of this individual who has chronic anomic aphasia, and the clinician is Martha Sherrill. And they are both referencing a photo of one of Mr. Bear's business trip pictures. So let's see how it goes.
I know which one it is.
Yeah, I know. Here's a group, and we're on the bus to Tijuana. Actually, we were right now when we took it. We were at San Diego.
Okay.
On getting ready to go to Tijuana. And this is our IASP convention with the group here.
So do you get to see them very often, or was it just
No, we don't. We used to all the time. We'd see Gerald, the first one on the right, but then Al, we don't see him much now. He's really retired now, and he's more politician right now. Actually, so is Gerald too, but Al really is.
So the picture of the party bus to Tijuana shouldn't get out, or Al's political career.
Yeah, party bus.
Right.
Bus.
Okay, so the party bus to Tijuana on number 10.
Right.
Okay.
Number 11.
Okay, so as you can see, the pair is very much engaged in the game, and they're coming up with names for the pictures, and they're even sharing stories about those pictures. And they seem to be having a lot of fun with it as well.
I know which one it is.
So to illustrate referential learning, I have excerpts from 2 CRI sessions with another client, which is Mr. Lee in this case, again, a pseudonym with a person who has chronic conduction aphasia. And the pair here is referencing a picture of a local post office that Mr. Lee frequently visited. So in this top transcript, you see is treatment session 3, and Mr. Lee is trying to describe post office. Starts off with several false starts and paraphasias. Goes with San, just San. Oh man, I really have it. The clinician says, it's so easy. Then someday, some text. Why can't I give you the name? I can't. It's about the subtle. So I think you're looking at the card that says, goes the clinician. Mr. Lee goes, there's 1, maybe 2 or 3 that you could have. Yeah, there are 3 cars. Yeah, but it's these on it by these people. Sanitaya, sin, disappoint. Clinician goes, so doesn't it say the United States Post Office? The United States, good, thank you. Post Office, clinician says again. Yes, okay. So in this instance, there seems to be a lot of back and forth. Mr. Lee is trying to get to the word that he wants to say, is not able to get it, but ends up describing some of the other things in the pictures, like 3 cars, counting the cars in the pictures to give the clinician a clue about which picture it could be. Here's the same picture in treatment session 10 that they're referencing. Mr. Lee goes, the other one is now United States, which stuff? Patient says, post office? Yes, okay. Post office on number 2. So he still struggles with the name, but he gets part of the name that he wants to say. But the overall effort that the pair put in with referencing this picture definitely seems to have reduced. And there is some amount of the number of turns, the number of words that has been used to come up with the label also seems to have reduced. So that's the referential learning piece that I want to highlight. So in terms of the therapeutic mechanism behind CRI, the unique setup of CRI allows participants to be engaged in gameplay while they repeatedly reference the target photos and also continue to have extended conversations about the target. So if you remember the video that we just saw of Mr. Bear, who was trying to describe the story of the party bus to Lake Tijuana, in that video, the pair definitely engaged in conversations and stories about pictures. But similarly, the pair gets to talk about similar such stories about each of the 12 photos. And remember, there are 6 trials in each session. So that just means that there is so many opportunities for the pair to use the names and the labels of the photos within a meaningful and authentic context. And so this repeated engagement within a meaningful activity is said to be allowing for a conversational repetition of references as opposed to isolated word repetition. And so this conversational repetition is said to promote referential learning. In addition to that, participants play with personally significant photographs from their own lives. It could be pictures of their wedding or vacations or trips that they took. But so those pictures make the task not only complex and challenging in terms of the names that they have to come up with for the photos, but it's also more authentic and highly meaningful for our clients. Another piece here would be the role of clinicians, and that would be of communication partners as opposed to leaders. So clinicians get to be flexible partners, offering support when needed, and thus providing the individuals with aphasia the freedom and choice with regard to their participation in the game itself. So to gather evidence on CRI, we have launched a series of treatment studies. In a phase 1 case study with 1 person with aphasia and 15 CRI sessions, we found preliminary evidence for successful referential learning. And we then conducted phase 2 research, which was a pre-efficacy study with an experimentally controlled design on 4 people with aphasia. And this study showed significant positive treatment effects of CRI on clinical naming tasks. And so currently we are conducting replication studies, and our future research is aimed at studying treatment efficacy on not just naming, but also everyday conversations and the overall quality of life as well. With that, this is my references. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Suma, for that excellent content. And we will move on to our Michigan native, who is now much farther south and in much nicer weather than there. So Jody Morgan, who is at Brooks Rehabilitation, will be talking us through some aspects of conversation. And Jody will probably go till just a couple minutes before the hour. Put your questions if you have them in the chat, and then we'll wind up from there. So Jody, all yours.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks to my wonderful colleagues for all of the information about conversation. I always get so excited and learn so much from everyone here at Aphasia Access. And I am slotted to talk about conversation groups and outpatient centers and about how you can make a difference. So what I'm hoping to do is inspire someone out there listening who really wants to start one of these really profound conversation groups. Now that we have some information about conversation, it is, what we can do. And for some reason, my slides are not going forward here. So hold on 1 second. Let me see. Let me stop it and try it one more time again, because they are not moving. right, we got it now. All right, so just really quickly, just to tell you, we're located in Jacksonville, Florida. We're a huge nonprofit organization, 160 beds. We have 45 outpatient centers. And I just want to talk about outpatient centers and how important it is for conversation groups. So one quote that a lot of my fellow colleagues at Brooks and I like is, one good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. So conversation is key to all of us. It's an integral part of our life. It's what we all love to do. And our friends with aphasia a lot of times don't have that conversational piece. We're really trying to instill in all divisions of our hospital organization how important conversation is. I was an outpatient therapist for Brooks for almost 12 years. And one of the things that my friends with aphasia would always ask me or tell me is, you know, you've done a really great job in outpatient therapy, but I've never met anybody else with aphasia. So having these conversation groups embedded within your outpatient center or any type of facility that you have is just, I think, so imperative. So here's some tips to start conversation groups from some of our wonderful speech language pathologists at Brooks and other folks who have started it and embedded it within our outpatient center. First of all, and everyone knows this, it's pivotal. It's pivotal to connect people with aphasia. It's so important, and it's just actually one of, I think, one of the greatest gifts that they can have is this conversation. A lot of our clinicians that started these outpatient groups were really surprised at the support from their managers and other disciplines. I'm going to give you some resources at the end, but one that really helped us a lot was on aphasia access, the Aphasia in North America, the Aphasia white paper by Dr. Nina Simmons-Mackey and colleagues. Anytime we had any type of pushbacks or wanted facts, we would use that information, and it would really help some of our administrators or managers that perhaps weren't speech language pathologists really understand the importance of conversation groups. So I highly recommend that as a tool set for folks who are interested in starting conversation groups. Making aphasia-friendly flyers and posting everywhere. It's not only good to get folks who are interested in the groups, but it's great for advocacy. We got a ton of calls just asking, what is aphasia? And again, posting them all over the place. It really, really helps. Hands down, we found all the groups that we have always love to learn about aphasia. They love to learn about the brain. They love to learn about aphasia, and that's really important to them. Sharing their story. And this, you can't see it for some reason on this slide, but there's a lot of fantastic work by Dr. Katie Strong and Barbara Shadden that really shares information and how-tos for clinicians. How to share their story. It's important for folks with aphasia to be able to share their story. Learning benefits of conversation and life participation approach to aphasia. A lot of these groups, they really have told us that a lot of the folks there just want to learn about conversation and talk. So here's just an example of our aphasia-friendly flyers. This is one of our fantastic speech language pathologists on the bottom, Marco Garcia, and he runs some of our wonderful groups. But it's just really important to have an aphasia-friendly flyer for folks. And PTs, OTs, and nurses can be incredible referral sources. We've really learned that just sharing the flyers in doctors' offices and things like that, we've gotten a lot of great feedback. Our PT and OT friends have been very dynamic in sending us referrals. It's super, super important to get a pulse for your group interest and provide choices. Every single group we find Jacksonville has a different personality, so to speak. Sending reminders when your groups are going to occur, using aphasia-friendly supports and materials, and then remembering that you can have your group anywhere. Conversations can happen anywhere. It can be in the middle of the gym. Some of our outpatient centers really don't have space, so they take a lunch hour and they literally use the PT-OT gym to have their conversations. Some have hosted them in big hallways and speech therapy rooms. just start and you'll be amazed at how much it will grow. And a lot of times what's the interesting part is things have occurred. So we've grown really big, and one of my therapists knocked on the door next door and said, hey, listen, I see you're not using your building very often. Can we borrow it for an hour and a half a week? And they let us use their building. So just ask, and conversations are fun. They're powerful. They foster that connection. And then also Zoom. I think, the one thing that the pandemic has done for outpatient and for the world in general is connect via Zoom. We've started some outpatient groups for not only our aphasia center, but also for the outpatient clinics, where we have 5 Zoom meetings a week. So people who can't make it into the outpatient setting would have these wonderful opportunities. And I know there's a lot out there, but it's really fantastic when they can meet online and then maybe get to see each other in the outpatient world, or the outpatient setting, or at our aphasia center, and can connect. So I think the Zoom is a wonderful way. And then just shout out to my wonderful therapists, Erin, Nikitas, and Kayla, who are pictured here, that run most of our online groups. They're doing a wonderful job of connecting and having fantastic conversations. And then we sometimes we'll have facilitators that are friends with aphasia, but we always have speech language pathologists, of course, on the calls. Games are super fun, and I'm going to give you some other ideas about what you can do in an outpatient center. We have a really powerful mental health group that is one of our favorite online Zoom meetings groups. And then, of course, we have music therapy. So there's all sorts of different things that conversation can have. This is some pictures from one of our groups, and they were really, really big into doing stuff outside. They all like to get outside, and of course, Florida is really warm. We stay in during the hot months, but they would do a lot of scavenger hunts and share time. So they would bring in things from home. They would do different activities at the outpatient center. And here they're pictured on the left of an outpatient center in St. Augustine, Florida. And so they would do a lot of things, and they would meet up. And then what's great about these conversation groups is what happens afterwards. So a lot of the group pictured on the left became really good friends, and they started doing weekly coffee chats without the speech pathologist, and they started going to outdoor concerts together, and they started doing some really fun things together. So really beautiful things come from having conversation and meeting others with aphasia. The group on the right is, of course, good old Una with some rules. And this is how it started in a speech therapist office, you can see there, and it got tight, and they had to kind of keep expanding. And so games are a super great way of conversation. We love to talk when we're playing games. And this is our group with led by Marco in Orange Park, Book and Movie Club. And I have a wonderful resource from Dr. Roberta Ellman that we really love, that really helps if you want to start with a book and movie club. My first ever outpatient group was our book and movie club, and I used her material, and it was fantastic. It helped guide me. And so I highly recommend looking for something like that if you need some materials. Some other groups that have been fantastic is time travel. And you can see on the right, people will bring in old records, and a lot of times the groups, your topic 70s, bringing things in from the house and having conversation and showing things really promote a lot of engagement, a lot of bonding. And, sometimes you'll get sick of talking about a certain topic, but again, it depends on what your members love. Here's the home run group. So I'm hoping to inspire some folks out there to starting these, embedding them in their outpatient groups. It's great. The ones that have been home runs for us are advocacy. What can we do in the community? They've done things like going into Starbucks and talking to them about making aphasia-friendly menus. They've done things like going to their individual churches. They've talked about all sorts of things during the conversation groups, and great things have happened. I mentioned time travel, games, scavenger hunt. It's called All About Me, or Our Life Story. We have book and movie clubs, stroke and aphasia information. These are always what I would call home run groups, that conversation groups, your very standard meat and potatoes of your group, so to speak. And just some quotes that I thought were pretty powerful about some of our friends that have been in this outpatient conversation group say, new friends and fun. This group makes me feel less isolated. I'm not the only one. Sometimes this group is the only opportunity. They've not met somebody else with aphasia. One person said, yes, 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 happy. And then someone else gave us the information, therapy great, but groups are incredible. So they loved the therapy, but they thought the groups were incredible. No more alone. Here's just some resources. There were tons of them, but I asked my outpatient therapists their favorites. The Neurogenic Communication Disorder and Life Participation Approach, Audrey Holland and Dr. Roberta Ellman. There's a fantastic chapter on Roberta Ellman has on CAPE and considering all of the aspects of that in your groups. There's a fantastic one about storytelling by Dr. Strong and Dr. Shadden. The group treatment of neurogenic communication disorders is a great resource. Groups that work from Stroke Comeback Center. And one of our favorite articles to the far right, two of them actually, from our friends in Australia, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Therapists. I think this has been just essential in training both our students and any therapists that are running groups. And then of course, what really matters to people with aphasia when it comes to group work. So looking through, hopefully providing some of these resources for you. And then these, of course, are just some other fantastic resources that will really help you get your group started. And I can't stress Aphasia Access in big, bold in the center of all this, because there is a whole resource section where they give you group ideas and plans. So any therapist out there or anyone that wants to start a group, there's everyone has shared their powerful information on this site. Podcast really inspired. There's a ton of presentations and resources. Aphasia Access has some wonderful free training videos. And of course, I mentioned Dr. Roberta Ellman has some wonderful ideas for starting a book clubs on her site. And reaching out to fellow colleagues, because this aphasia community is so giving of resources and ideas. And I am going to go ahead and stop, and I hopefully will have a couple of seconds for 1 minute for questions.
Yeah, so it's been such a great amount of information, and there's plenty of questions that people have. We're not gonna have time to get to them, unfortunately, but this is part of starting the conversation about conversation. So with that being said, we're going to kind of button up the session for today. We want to make a couple mentions. There are some questions in the chat that we're going to ask our presenters to respond to offline. So we won't have time today, but if you have a question, stick it in the chat and we'll save them and get them to the presenters. A big thank you to these 4 wonderful presenters, to Suzanne, Marion, Suma, and Jody. Just an absolutely fantastic lineup. This foursome hit all of the important elements. So thank you all incredibly much. There's references in the chat, a PDF file that each of these 4 presenters found relevant references. So I'd encourage you to look at those. Think about membership at Aphasia Access. Jody said it. This is a community and great to connect with colleagues. $12.50 a month is what it comes down to. We can do that in no time. IARC 2022, let's keep the conversation going in person, in Philly. So submit and look forward to seeing you there. And I think we'll just end this with the quote that Jody put up from Linda Lambert. One good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of this community. Have a wonderful day, and we'll end it here. Thank you.